See what happens when you fearlessly jump into the deep end? You get some of the best content of the day. A special shout out to John, Peter, and Willie for their take on the impact of SD-WAN and how service providers are delivering on SD-WAN expectations and next-gen services. Well, ready for more? Here we go for the next deep dive. Evolving SD-WAN as a transformation enabler, virtualization and automation at the edge. This is a great deep dive session. You're joining us, and please welcome to the screen Jack Pugaczewski, Distinguished Architect of Lumen Technologies, MEF Distinguished Fellow, Gabriela Laghi, Head of Edge Automation and Virtualization Engineering at Sparkle, and Marc Boutier, Head of Virtualization Solutions of Econops. We've got a global audience joining us from Italy, from France, and from Minnesota here domestically. So, gentlemen, if you don't mind, to start us off, and we'll go in the order of Jack, Gabriela, and Marc, could you give us a quick overview of your role and how you're supporting your company's SD-WAN related initiatives?
Sure. Jack Pugaczewski, Distinguished Architect at Lumen, and I am also working, or my main responsibilities are API development at MEF and bringing those APIs into Lumen to help in our digital transformation.
Hi, my name is Gabriele Laghi and I work in the engineering department of Sparkle. Sparkle is a team group company with the objective of developing international sales and retail businesses. And we are in the team group, and we are a business unit for the provisioning of international service.
Yes, myself, Marc Boutier. Good afternoon. So I'm part of Econops company. So I'm in charge of the overall product strategy for Econops in terms of virtualization. So that's encompassing both the SD-WAN portfolio together with Universal CPE, NFVI, and what we call as well on our side the Compose Management Stack, which is basically all these APIs that managing our own solution. So very pleased to attend today.
No, and thank you all. We're pleased you're here with us as well. So let's kick in. Gabriela, I'll start with yourself, and Marc, I'd love a follow-on to this. If you could share with us, how do you see new variables of digital transformation driving the industry toward SD-WAN, and how does that impact the way networks are being built?
Well, from an engineering department point of view, let me say that the common networking approach we have seen many years since the consolidation of IP and PLS solution has been based on a design solution between customer premises, focusing mainly on pure connectivity and segregation feature. Let me say we have been focused on market standards like IPVPN over MPLS, IPsec over Internet, and but is for many years the kind of solution that fit properly on the context. But that approach has been absolutely right, also with on-premises data center application. But with the advent of the new variables of digital transformation, things are changing now. And the pure technical networking with CLI configuration is not enough. The factors that are mainly changing the paradigm of let me say, cloudification of application, the security in the cloud, that is having a very disruptive evolution if compared with a simple network traffic segregation or basic firewalling features. And consequently, let me say that there is a rising needs for flexibility, rapidity or configuration, application flow implementation and policing are a must in this environment. Also, assurance and monitoring something perceived as pivotal for customers because on extranet connectivity depends the basic functioning of a company. Let me say that in this new context, we have a very great expectation for a much more controlled view, and we think that SD-WAN is the architecture that fits properly in this context.
As said by Gabriele, the transformation of the way the IT is consuming now this underlay, which is much more related to application rather than network. So most of the people now are no more talking about network, they are talking about application, they are talking about consuming cloud services. So that's something which really impact below all the way the infrastructure has to be built in order to be able to address this kind of needs, and how do you manage this kind of flexibility. And this definitely also where we truly believe, and I think we share Gabriel's view in that approach, is all the automation which is going around this kind of solution make a lot of sense, because it has on one side, of course, to simplify the way the IT people is working and consuming the network today, but at the same time, from a service provider, it has also to consolidate how it delivers the services, and both from an overlay perspective, so SD-WAN if we want to call it simply, but also from its underlay perspective, and how it will dimension and engineer its network based on the different behaviors of the consumers, which are changing quite drastically. And we see that as well now with security. In the past, security was either not treated or treated at the edge. Now we treat that in the cloud. So that means even more workload on the network, and even more automation to ensure that this security is also a fully integrated component out of the solution and for the service provider building their own infrastructure.
Thank you, Mark. Gabriel, I want to jump back for a moment. Why is centralized resource management, why is it so important in a hybrid connectivity and multi-cloud environment?
Well, let me say that in an hybrid resource context, private and public elements mix, but remains with the same top priority level of attention, because they are components of the same engine. Moreover, the public environments are dominated by over-the-tops is a set of multiple complex solutions that offers depending on the parameter applied, like cost, features, supported software, and even specific hardware. See, for example, the hardware GPU specialization that we are seeing for applications like artificial intelligence and so on. So as you can imagine, a mix of these things produce a spider web context, more or less, in which a centralized smart resource management tool like SD-WAN is pivotal, in my view, for understanding how strategically and, let me say, tactically manage the network and its heterogeneous resources.
Thank you. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to stay. Gabrielle and Mark, I've got a couple questions. Jack, I haven't forgot about you. I'm going to get to you. I got lots of questions for you coming up here as well. But again, Gabrielle, I want you to continue, and then Mark with a follow-on. How do you see virtualization and automation impacting the evolution of SD-WAN, especially as a transformation enabler?
Well, all these SD-WAN components that we have seen are not alone in a service provider architecture, but they fit inside an architecture which we can refer to the MEF-CECP LSO architecture, just to have a view. SD-WAN is one of the orchestrator technologies that integrates in this big picture of the LSO architecture for network automation virtualization. Moreover, automation needs, as usual, a standardization, like what we have done in MEF with MEF-17 service attributes and service definition, MEF-82 service modeling work, or also like the SD-WAN certification. These are all tools, guidelines that represent the right tools for reaching this target of standardization. Moreover, virtualization is something integrated in SD-WAN, let me say. Virtually, SD-WAN in private or public cloud represent an essential element to be orchestrated for reaching an overall view of application. All this part should work in cooperation with, obviously, with BSS and OSS components of the architecture, but moreover, also with third parties, as we said.
Yeah, so as a solution of an FVI as well and virtual edge, so that's something that we see, of course, a lot more demands coming in, because we know that the origins of the SD-WAN was coming with physical appliance. And we know how it could be complex for a service provider to manage a large variety of appliances, and especially because we know that there is no SD-WAN fitting all the needs of their customers. So this is where we truly believe that a UCP approach, virtualization approach at the edge, also brings some value to the SD-WAN, enabling the service provider to to provide the right SD-WAN to its customers. But at the same time, for him, of course, it's also a challenge because from an API perspective, as mentioned by Gabriel, you have to be sure that you will be able to adapt and to deploy such environment quite easily. So, of course, on one side, you add a bit of complexity by using virtualization at the edge. On the other side, you give a lot of freedom to the service provider to speed up the deployment of SD-WAN and to be sure that finally it won't be dependent of the physical appliance. And for him, as said also by Gabriel, streamlining the delivering process of the SD-WAN. On the other side, as you mentioned, as an SD-WAN supplier, we are touching the virtualization in the cloud. And that's also something which is very important. How do we deliver services from the cloud, and how a service provider can automate the deployment, a simultaneous deployment from the edge to the cloud to provision the overall infrastructure in order to deliver these services. And that's definitely where, of course, the MEF and all these standardization API make a lot of sense in order for the service provider to be able to address this market and to gain this flexibility to deliver the solution to the market.
Awesome. Mark, continue for me for just a moment, and Gabriel will come back. Share some examples of your customers or your own company's experience with SD-WAN.
At the end of the day, the really important stuff behind the SD-WAN story is this ability to deploy easily. And that's something which is very important. It's clearly an enabler for the SD-WAN. But what we have seen, compare beside the marketing term to say, yeah, everything is zero touch, it's easy, you can do whatever. As soon as you have to insert a new edge into a network, it's never as simple as it seems. So, of course, from an OTT player, that's look good. And it's a good marketing argument. But as soon as you have to insert an edge doing routing into a data center, into an edge, it's not that straightforward, to be honest. So you have to spend a bit of time, and it's still for the moment a project-based approach. And that's also why SD-WAN have some challenge to enter into the mass market at the end, is because each deployment remains a unique deployment. So of course, on our side, we are working to standardize as much as we can, and we have some value out of our portfolio to do these kind of things. But beside that, that's also not only our solution, that's the overall process from the service provider to be able to streamline this deployment from an end-to-end perspective, and not only from a customer. But trust me, deploying SD-WAN, it's nice on paper, doing a POC, connecting to a cloud infrastructure where you show things very easy. Deploy a bit more than 3,000 sites within 6 months, that's a different story. And the SD-WAN is not the most complex one out of it. You can be sure of that.
Mark, that is from the vendor side, let me say that what we learned from a service provider point of view from vendors is the simplification that SD-WAN brings with its application. And what we have done in our use case is that we started for simplifying our own network. So our first use case was applying SD-WAN to our internal connection network, and it's a worldwide network for controlling our own network elements. And let me say, it's a very simplified network with all the characteristics of resiliency, multi-access underlay, security component, but obviously, and with a very simplified view, as Mark said. We have applied this SD-WAN solution to a network of about 75 network management premises, a couple of data center. And let me say, on this component, with this experience, our aim is to have a real training for our enterprise market with the SD-WAN solution.
Awesome, and thanks for sharing. And so we're going from Europe, we're going to jump back to Minnesota. So Jack, you're back in this game, and we're excited to hear from you. Help us understand, what would you say is the value proposition of open standardized APIs?
I would say that not just for SD-WAN, an open API for SD-WAN. I certainly need the automation for the provisioning, and then after that, the next day, customer may want the service assurance aspects, and so you'll see oncoming APIs to support SD-WAN. But SD-WAN automation by itself is not enough, and we need the automation of the underlay connectivity services, whether that's carrier Ethernet or IP or IPVPN. The underlay connectivity services also need and can leverage the value of open standard APIs, which MEF is addressing. Because I get an order for an SD-WAN, it's also going to either assume, or it may be necessary, to Mark's earlier point, if I got 3,000 sites, I may have to activate a number of the connectivity services to support that SD-WAN. And so to get the, what I call getting away from 30 to 90 days of a network service or product coming up to 30 to 90 seconds, I'm going to need the open standard APIs for SD-WAN, as well as the underlay connectivity services were applicable to support that SD-WAN. And I'll say one more thing is the work that is being done on MEF-70, MEF-82 are not just helpful in the development of open standard APIs, but those same models that can be used for vendors, for carriers, for customers to build open microservices within their own internal back office solutions and network operating systems, support systems, and orchestration solutions. Those common models are applicable for APIs as well as open microservices.
Awesome. Mark, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, to be honest, I share clearly the point of view of Jack, because when I was talking about this large deployment, at the end, one of the main failure was the fact that the underlay was not provisioned at the time we were going on site. And why is because there is simply no API to automate all of that. And then, of course, you are creating some challenge. And definitely this open API is there, and we are convinced of that within Equinox to simplify the overall provisioning, but also to accelerate the deployment, because we know that it's quite obvious for the service provider. They are running after the time and behind the OTT players. And of course, they are always the bad guy when the underlay is not connected. So we know that by default, and this API needs to be there to be consistent from an end-to-end perspective. And I fully agree with Jack. And we know that today, we are talking about API for underlay. We are talking about API for SD-WAN. Tomorrow, we have this SASE platform, which is coming. So we will need API as well to ensure the overall provisioning from an end-to-end. And that's clearly one of the main points that is well addressed now by the MEF through the different MEF standards, which is going. And that's, I think, a very powerful argument for the service provider to push this kind of approach towards the vendors like us in reality.
No, and it's great perspective. Then that was a good team. So I'll throw it back to you again, Jack and Mark. You share all that, but then what do you see as some of the industry barriers that are holding people back from adopting the standard APIs?
I would say some of the barriers have nothing to do with the technical issues, right? I think sometimes it comes down to organizational perspective or changes. If you look at what's going on in the network, there's a term that's been used, and that's software's eating the world. It's nothing truer than that in this space. And what you have is you have traditional IT departments and traditional network groups that are coming together and having to recognize that both groups are going to have to work together. Both groups are going to have to transform from a traditional, say, telco into a true software engineering corporation. And so in some cases, that whole idea is certainly is a learning curve for some. But in some cases, it's going to take some organizational changes and jumping over that chasm, if you will, into newer technologies. Thinking as a combination of a domain expert in cloud and network, along with understanding the software engineering aspects of that.
Yeah, and I think there is also some company strategy, to be honest. As a matter of fact, it's also a way to not going to open API to protect yourself from the competition. And there is this also this mindset sometimes that getting a standard API will slow down the innovation, but that's not the reality. If we take it day one as a standalone point that you have to consider starting within your development.
Thank you, Mark. And I'm going to stay with you. And Jack, certainly feel free to jump in on this as well. I know for a fact in the audience, we have service provider software architects. We have enterprise architects. What advice do you give them?
So simplification, as said by Gabriel, is really the point, right? So we should stop trying to build very complex infrastructure. So that's what service provider is doing very well. But from an enterprise perspective, they should focus on their business need, right? And not only on the technical anymore. So that's something that we know that service providers are doing well. And sometimes it's becoming very challenging because we see some IT people thinking that they also master what the WAN infrastructure should be and could be, and then try to build some huge solution, which at the end doesn't deliver the services they are really expecting from their enterprise. And I think the good point is really to collaborate together with the service provider in order to understand how this transformation of their business is moving them forward and what is the good architecture to do so.
I'll just add this. I think both from an enterprise and a carrier perspective is a new recognition of who the customer is and what the customer expects. I believe that the customers expect that there's going to be network connectivity. Similarly, I believe the customers expect that there's going to be connectivity to the cloud. That cloud could be in a data center. That cloud could be out on the edge, as we discussed earlier. And the recognition that the sooner that we get to leveraging these open APIs, not just for SD-WAN or the underlay connectivity services, but also for the cloud, because the frontier in the customers that are going to expect then to have vertical solutions and open APIs for financial, for government, for education, etc. And so the sooner we enable and automate what some could view as commodity, network and cloud, the sooner that the enterprise and carriers are going to be able to have automated solutions for vertical markets. And so now you have new revenue opportunity. At the same time, through this automation, you're reducing your operational cost.
Absolutely. Then Jack, continue and share what process is used for designing and developing standard APIs and what types are actually being developed.
I would say right now MEF has a great approach, and specifically before any of the APIs were developed, MEF started with the recognition of creating technical specifications on services, carrier Ethernet services, SD-WAN. Now we're doing layer 1 connectivity services, IPVPN. So we could take those technical specifications that clearly define the objects, the attributes, the constructs, and from there we can build the corresponding information models like MEF-82 that is derived from MEF-70. And from there, then we start saying, okay, now we have the resources. With these resources, then we can what I call restify them or build the Open API 3.0 or Swagger API that supports then the automation for specific functional areas such as order, quote, inventory. In places where we're doing that, certainly people are familiar with what we're doing from a service provider to operator with Sonata. Cantata came out with its first release here as well, which is service provider to enterprise. These are for carrier Ethernet, but we're leveraging again these specifications, these models to build these open APIs from that will support the three actors of the enterprise customer, the service provider, and the operator, and that's our approach.
Now, we're absolutely building them, but Jack, then how are we possibly gauging success? What's the metric in?
The metric has to be implementation, right? At the end of the day, we can build all the APIs, but if they're not being consumed and leveraged, then we're not meeting the metric. So very simply, there has to be seen the value and the implementation. And again, the APIs, certainly Sonata and Cantata, are east to west APIs from an enterprise customer, service provider, operator. But if you look at the whole LSO, there's work being done, say, at Legato and work that's been done at Presto. That same recognition that carriers have and customers with east to west open APIs and the value, We need to start seeing carriers and vendors recognizing the value in open standards and not having pairwise APIs between a carrier and multiple vendors within a carrier's own network. It's the same proposition. Removal of pairwise API, which reduces, if we're moving to open standards, open APIs, we remove the development time, and we get the value of those open APIs from all aspects of the industry.
Awesome. And Jack and team, we're wrapping up our time here for deep dive session number 2. Implementation is absolutely the key. Thank you so much, Jack. And thank you to all of our panelists as well. Folks, once again, put your appreciation and your hands together for Jack Pugaczewski from Lumen Technologies, Gabriela Lagi from Sparkle, and Marc Boutier from Econops. Definitely my best test of the names in one session together. All right, don't go too far. We have our 3rd deep dive session immediately following. That'll take us from SD-WAN to SASE, and I will see you there in just a moment.